Recommendation of the Bagot Commission report, written by Governor General Sir Robert Bagot, proposed that the separation of children from their parents would be the best way to achieve assimilation with the Indigenous peoples. This report was the catalyst for implementing residential schools across Canada. The federal government thought through the residential schools it would encourage ideas of settlement, agriculture, education, and Christianization upon the Indigenous peoples. But really, it was about power and control.
Indigenous peoples were subject to educational edicts that stressed the virtues of cultural uniformity over cultural accommodation.
Indigenous peoples resisted through non-violent means by removing their children from the schools, hiding them, refusing government funds, and non-compliance to the annual census.
Residential schools began in Canada in the 1870s, and the last one finally closed in 1996. Author and activist Joseph Conrad, in the 2017 book called Inconvenient Indian, sums up the ill effects of the residential school. He writes, "The legacy of the residential school system continues to impact Indigenous people, families, and communities. On its doorstep, we can lay the responsibility for high poverty rates, the large number of Indigenous children in foster care, the disproportionate number of incarcerated Indigenous people, and the hundreds of missing and murdered Indigenous women."
In our seminar, we are going to look at how residential schools have shaped various creative mediums, viewing some brilliant Indigenous artists' poems, music, visual arts, TED Talk, and storybooks. Throughout the seminar, note the recurring themes of resistance, reclamation, and activism.
Poetry is a carefully articulated form of expression. For some Indigenous peoples, poetry has provided an outlet to release the inner trauma caused by residential schools. As you explore the poetry section in our virtual classroom, you will most likely feel an intangible amount of emotion. However, the notions of strength, resistance, reclamation, and activism are also distinctly noticeable. These powerful themes are seen throughout the work of Louise Bernice Haff, who is an Indigenous poet, social worker, and residential school survivor. Ms. Haff explains that retracing her past through poetry is extremely challenging and frightening. You can find Louise Haff's poem, Masqua Bear, in our virtual classroom by clicking on the cover of her newest book, Burning in This Midnight Dream.
In our virtual classroom, check out the bookcase. In particular, I put a link to a reading of the children's book, Stolen Words, by Melanie Florence. The author created it as a gift or wish for her grandfather. The story of a young girl who teaches her grandfather the Cree words he lost as a student of the English-only speaking residential schools. It demonstrates the resistance Indigenous peoples have made in assimilating to English as the young girl reclaims her Cree language. Read through any book carefully before presenting it to your class to ensure the content matter is appropriate and at the very least not triggering. In our virtual classroom, on the top of the bookshelf is a little newspaper icon. I've also attached a link on it to a thought-provoking article. It's an example of what can happen when an educator doesn't consider every child's background in a careful and cautious manner.
The road to recovery for Indigenous people is ongoing despite the continued activism and resistance presented by the Indigenous nation. The Indigenous way of living in Western culture is often viewed as unfitted to thrive on its own. Therefore, governing powers believe by controlling Indigenous lives, they would assist in Indigenous survival in the modern world. Although, as Eddie Robinson argues in his TEDx video, An Indigenous Journey to Leadership, government interventions led to Indigenous people ranking highest in incarcerations, unemployment, and often being subject to poverty across the globe. Click on the TEDx image in our virtual classroom to listen to Eddie Robinson's TEDx talk.
Music has been another form of expression, which is a very important aspect in Indigenous communities. The three songs I would like to introduce are I Apologize by Gary Fielgard, The Stranger, Mr. Secret Path, sung by the late Gord Downey, as well as the residential school song sung by Cheryl Bear. I will be introducing you to Cheryl Bear's song, the Residential School Song. Miss Bear has been involved in many workshops, such as the Indigenous Awareness Training Workshop. Not only has she provided awareness by being involved in quote-unquote walking together in hope and healing relationships, she has also provided another awareness which is called Indigenous Cultural Awareness through story and song. Please click on the link in the virtual classroom to listen to the Residential School Song.
Art is often used as self-expression and as an escape from everyday life, but it also allows space to confront personal and historical traumas. I encourage you to explore the art on the walls of our classroom. Click on an art piece to learn more about each one. I would like to personally introduce you to Robert Hoole's Sandy Bay Residential School series. This is a collection of 24 drawings about the artist's own experience at Sandy Bay Residential School. Hoole used these drawings as a way to reclaim his memories and his language. Residential schools forbade children from speaking Indigenous languages, so as a way to decolonize his mind, his drawings are inscribed with words in his native language, Soto. This series embodies the concept of bagadinan, letting it go. Once a memory of an experience left Hoole's mind, he considered the drawing complete.
The last thing we invite you to do on your tour of our virtual classroom is to click on this icon. There are many things that we can do right now as future educators to support our Indigenous brothers and sisters.